happy Easter to everyone here and all those who are watching from their homes. It's great to have you with us here this morning on this, of course, unbelievably grand day, this Easter. And before I get into it, I want to release, of course, the kids downstairs. Your teachers will be waiting for you in the hallway here to your right. And so you are released to go downstairs, and they'll tell you where to go when you get there. But it is so great to be with you guys here this morning. Honestly, of course, it's very different than last year. Of course, when I think it was just myself, Ed, and a couple other Mulaney's downstairs for Easter. I think Ray and Alyssa might have been with us, and that was about it, if I remember correctly. And so absolutely wonderful to be able to have and hold Easter together and be together here this Easter. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And and particularly at this time, I think, particularly now, particularly, during these, all that goes on about us and around us with the various changes that are happening all around us, it's just, well, gosh, all the things. I can go on and on and on about it. Some of those songs that we sang, particularly, they just hit right home to our current situation and all the rest that goes on. Like I say, that's happening around us. But really putting into place this day, putting into place, where does Easter lie? Where does the resurrection, where does the death and resurrection of Jesus, where does that stand? What kind of perspective does that give us in terms of all the things that we've been going through for this last year, of course. The world has been going through, honestly. And for us, this is a celebration, this momentous event. Really, it's not just a religious event. This is an event of human history. It's a historical fact. This is not just something nice to believe about somebody's leader of their religion. This is a historical fact of an individual who is Jesus, who came to earth. And he said he came with reason and purpose. And that purpose and reason was fulfilled. And we saw it fulfilled, particularly on Friday. Those who were here on Good Friday, again, just a wonderful celebration on Good Friday, those who were watching. And just absolutely outstanding. His fulfillment of all that he came to do, particularly on this day, where we find a victory over sin, a victory over death. Itself in the resurrection of Jesus. So what does it mean, and why does it, how can it have meaning for us even today? There's one thing I think that is obvious, which I think goes unnoticed because we take it for granted to a large extent in our present world. But Jesus' death and resurrection, even as one of the videos said, it changes everything. It changed everything. I mean, and I say it's very hard for us in our present day to capture that. Just a cursory reading of Roman history and Roman society will tell you it changed everything, and we don't realize how decadent, how actually brutal it was. And during the Roman era, which lasted almost a millennia. That's how long it lasted. We think we know we're a young country, but you think about the Roman Empire, almost lasted 1,000 years. Okay, so we're talking the unbelievable things that Jesus showing up and Christians showing up in that society. What that meant. It was a slap in the face to who they were, ingrained in them, in the world itself. He changes everything. And something about that. He's still changing and transforming people's lives radically. Right? I mean, anybody's life been changed because of Jesus? I mean, the way it was and the way it is. You see? But I think sometimes we can take it for granted in living out our day in and day out life. We were born in this society as it is. And whether people consider themselves Christians or not, it is true. They are living right now in a better world, to a large extent, believe it or not, because of Jesus. They're living a different reality that would have been lived if Jesus did not show up and do what he did. So it's not just for those people of faith, it is for everyone. Jesus has changed everything because of what Jesus has done. And as I mentioned last week, those transformed by his presence in their lives have acted to reflect that change that they themselves had undergone. From seeing life, just from seeing people as valuable, the dignity of life itself, the sanctity of life. You see, that what did not exist. Infanticide, abortion, child abandonment was rampant in the Greek and Roman era until Jesus showed up. The gladiatorial contest, the brutality. You know, when we think about the gladiatorial contest, a lot of people think it was just simply the emperor who put the thumbs down to have someone, killed in front of everyone. And then while they cheer, believe it or not, it was the women who actually did that. And most of the time, guess what they did? We don't realize because where we live and what goes on about us now, we take for granted. But Jesus has changed everything. Even his people after him, and seeing the value of life, believe it or not, from seeing the value of life, even to the sciences, are credited to Christians. Things like associated with justice, fairness, due process, education, health care, even the environment, all comes from a Christian perspective, unknown until Jesus showed up. At the cross, Jesus defeated the principalities and powers that were in charge. At the cross, God becomes king. God is always king, of course, but in terms of the world, he defeats the principalities and powers, the forces of darkness. That's why I love, some of our, songs this morning talk about that. When us going from darkness into light, that's how, as I've mentioned here before, that's how the early Christians described this new relationship with Jesus. They didn't really describe it as we do, as going from religion to relationship. That's 16th century, 17th century language. They talked about it in terms of going from darkness into light. Being ones who are walking in distinct darkness, to all of a sudden somebody turning on the light bulb. And you could see all that was going on about them and how truly dark it was. Therefore, anyone who would run to his banner, in other words, banners he would put up, when you think of when you think of two armies, who are going to be in contest with one another, and what you would see is these banners, right? The banners that distinguishes one side from the other. Anyone who would run even from the enemy lines to under Jesus' banner would find themselves rescued from those same powers which try to control and harm us, the evil in the world itself. And those powers are very willing to allow us to design our own banners in self-representation and self-identity, so long as we do not align ourselves with Jesus as the true King. And that's why I love, of course, that last one. Because why? Because our King is alive. And he remains alive. From the day he showed up until this day, he is alive. He is the King. I want to read out of Colossians this morning, chapter 2. And starting with verse 8. And Paul here talking, and just absolutely just wonderful passage of Scripture. And he says this, "Therefore, as you received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him, established in faith, just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving." I started with verse 6. Here's verse 8. "See to it that no one takes you captive." See that no one takes you captive. And I'm not going to get into the particulars about that, but see that no one deceives you and grabs hold of you, brings you back into a dark life again. It tells you how you should be living out your life in accordance with the world's perspectives. Let's just say it that way. "See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit according to human tradition." The philosophy and empty deceit of a human tradition, only a human way of seeing things. According to elemental spirits, according to the elemental things of life, as if they're a big deal. Just the base things of life. But not according to Christ. For in Jesus, the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily. He's incarnate God. He is God incarnate. God has come to rescue his people. God has come to rescue his creation. And you have been filled in him, who is the head of all, of every rule and authority. In him also you were circumcised with a circumcision not made with human hands, but putting off the body of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ, the circumcision of Jesus in our hearts, having been buried with him in baptism. We just had baptism last Sunday, and it just was awesome. We had 4 people being baptized last week. And just, and as I was thinking about it, of course, again, those 4 people represented such a range, and so typical of our church too, as well. From Penny, what I mean, this real young girl to who pretty much grew up in the church, and another guy, Robert, is 27. He's kind of like from basically streets of Poughkeepsie, you know what I mean, and came in through somebody else, you know what I mean, came to Christ in my office, just absolutely, came in through Helen's family, and just absolutely wonderful seeing the Spirit of God. It's about being filled with the Spirit of God, having the Spirit of God come on somebody, you know what I mean, and have their life become changed. And then Patrice, who I said this last week again, but I'm repeating myself because it just goes through my head. Patrice, who was a ride-by, I call him a ride-by, she was riding by on her way to someplace else. And then the Spirit of God basically, she doesn't describe it that way, but I do. Spirit of God tapping on her shoulder, so you got to go in there. You got to go in that place. You got to go in there. Something in there for you. You got to go in there. And then coming here, and then of course, and coming into this faith walk with Jesus, and her growth as a Christian, even and then to Walter's here as well, right? This morning, sitting in the second row here, just absolutely outstanding. Who came into what I call side door of the church, not through the front door on a Sunday morning, but through one of our programs that we have in the church, and came in that way because why? Looking for healing for other things, but found the ultimate healing and rescue and salvation through Jesus Christ. And so they are in this sentence, right? Being baptized, having been buried with him in baptism, that Good Friday, that we too are buried with Jesus. All of what we've done, all the things that have happened to us, in which you were also raised with him. You were buried with him in baptism, and you were also raised with him through faith in the powerful working of God who raised him from the dead. And you who were dead in your trespasses and uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgiven us of all our trespasses, forgiven us for everything and anything that we've ever done and ever will do, by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside. He put it aside. He buried it. He buried our guilt. He buried our shame. You see? This he set aside, nailing it to the cross. He disarmed the rulers. By doing that, he disarmed those forces that would come against us. Those dark forces, those principalities and powers that try to keep us captive. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame. I just got to love Paul by saying this. By triumphing over them in him. He triumphs over them. Wait, what are you talking about? Didn't they nail him to the cross? Wasn't it they who they thought won a great victory by nailing Jesus to the cross? And yet Paul, almost like with a chuckle, the irony in that moment, what they thought would destroy him and his movement, they actually brought to life. It was a triumph. And sometimes you see much of what we think in terms of Christian walk and much of what we think in terms of this way, sometimes it's so counterintuitive, so opposite of the way we would think, that the symbol such as this would become our symbol. A symbol of that day of shame. To die on a cross. If any Jew was to be crucified, you were not allowed as a criminal. You were not allowed to be buried in the cemetery with other Jews. You had to be buried outside the cemetery because it was a death of shame. Yet it becomes the symbol of victory. He disarmed the rulers and authorities, put them to open shame by triumphing over them. Therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in question of food or drink or with regard to festivals or all the rest, he says. This is not about religious observance. This is all about how we are interacting in relationship with Jesus. You know, my uncle, when trying to capture this, I think to some extent, one of the things that always keeps coming to mind, always for me, is my uncle used to tell this story. He's from Italy. And he talks about when he was a young man, and he's coming over, actually, first time to the United States. He's coming through Ellis Island, right, after the war. And he's online, and And as he's going online, he would he was a man of very few words. My uncle, I mean, literally, he grunted his way through most conversations. Mm, mm. That was pretty much my uncle, and and so. But anyway, but he was like my second father. I think I've mentioned this here before. He was like my second father, and but Zio Pasquale, Uncle Pasquale, Zio Pasquale, and he would tell these stories. We'd always have our elders, if you will, tell us stories. We'd sit at nighttime on the front porch of my uncle's house, my grandfather's house, and as little kids, and we'd have them just tell us stories, all night long. They would just tell us different stories about things. And matter of fact, when each one was passing away, getting close to be passed away, I have one aunt left, actually. This previous generation, we have one aunt left. And but before any one of them would pass, we'd always make sure that they would tell us the story. And they would tell us the same story, you know what I mean? Maybe we've heard it 1,000 times, I don't care. We'd have them tell us the stories again and again and again. And one of the ones my uncle used to love to tell was when he was coming over for the first time, went to Ellis Island. And as he's online with a couple of his own relatives, he's there. And Ellis Island, you have, of course, thousands of people, right? Thousands and thousands of people. And so as they're coming through, of course, you have to almost like anybody who's ever been to the airport, and you had to go through customs or whatever, you had to first go to some place where they would check you in, right? And then you would have a healthcare person there. Why? Because they weren't going to let you in the country if you had an issue. So if you had an issue, if you were sick, I don't care if you had a fever or if you were flu-ish or whatever it was, I mean, they weren't letting you in. Basically what they would do is, after you just took this long boat ride, and it was a boat ride, okay, it wasn't a plane, they would literally take you off that line and put you on another line, and that line was going back on the boat, and turned you around after you just spent all this money, probably most of those people, all their money, to get on that boat to come to the United States to find a new life. They literally just take you and put you on another line, heading out again, heading back to Italy. And so when he's going through the line where they have the healthcare thing happening there. He sees there's a man ahead of him. There's a single man ahead of him. There's him, and then there's a single man. And in front of that man, there is a family. There's this family. There's a father, a young father, wife, and they had 2 or 3 children. I don't remember how many children. They had 2 or 3 kids. And so what they would do is they would, if you were someone who was ill, what they would do is they'd actually take like chalk and they'd put a big X on your back, basically. So he'd say they put an X on your back. So they'd know, you know what I'm trying to say. They follow you around, in case you were trying to go someplace else. They put an X on your back, and then they say, yeah. And so, of course, this man's going to come through line with his family, and the father's sick. And so they put a big X on his back, and oh my God, that family now was distraught. They spent everything to try to get here. And they're distraught. They're all crying. The wife is crying. Nobody speaks English, you see. And what do you do? What are you going to do? And the kids are crying. They're crying, I'm trying to say. The father's crying, you see. But that man that was in between my uncle and that family, all of a sudden, when they kind of were moving further and kind of out of sight from the person, he quickly took off his coat and took the other man's coat off, ripped the other man's coat off, and put his coat on the father's coat, and took the man's coat, who had the X on it. So so when we think of things like that, you think of Jesus. He got the big X for us. We want to go in a certain direction, but other things are trying to force us to, because we got a stain on our back. Take us someplace else. And he puts the X on himself. This is Good Friday. That's what we're about. And that's why Paul in Galatians 3:27 says this. He says, For as many of you who were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. For as many as you who are baptized into Christ, you've put on Christ. You've taken off your garment, that old garment of yours, and yeah, you put on Christ. You put on Christ's garment over you. How could Jesus do this? Colossians 2:14 says this, by canceling, 2:14 Colossians says, by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross. As one who has received Jesus' coat, as ones who have received Jesus' coat, we can say, like Paul in Galatians 2:20, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loves me and gave himself for me. See, Easter, is all about this new life. To have, when we think about new life, to have something new, it must be new over something that was old. The way things were to the way things are or could be. New is new. In Romans chapter 6, verse 4, it says this, we were buried, therefore, with him by baptism into death, in order that, just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, we too might walk where? In newness of life. That now we walk in a newness of life. Life now for us is new. For life to go into something new, the old must pass away. How does he do it? In Colossians 2:15, in terms of our reading this morning, says this, he disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. As I said, they believed that by putting Jesus to death, they had won. And as I said, Paul loves the irony. It reminds me of anyone who've seen or read, of course, Chronicles of Narnia. Right? Chronicles of Narnia, if you've seen the movie as well, right? And in Chronicles of Narnia, of course, you have Aslan, and you've got someone who has sinned mightily, you see, and gone against, the people of Narnia and gone against what was truly supposed to happen. And of course, the White Witch, or what do they call her? Not the White Witch, what do they call her? Huh? The White Witch. And of course now, and what does she do? She actually, she deceives with her earthly, if you will, her earthly philosophies, and you see her deceitful ways. She deceives Edmund. And so what happens? To get Edmund free, of course, Aslan gives himself to the White Witch. What is she going to do with him, of course? And she's going to put him on an altar, and she's going to kill him, thinking that would be the end of all and everything. Now she would be free, and in her rule, she'd be able to be free to do everything she wanted to do. But then, of course, it's, as the story of Jesus' resurrection, two women, you know what I mean? Some women go to there, and they see all of a sudden the altar broken in half, and there's Aslan alive. Just great. That's a great Easter read, or a great Easter movie to actually watch. Jesus spoiled the plans of those trying to enslave people to their way of thinking and their philosophy. Human contrivances and perspectives and fascinations with base things, those things that have Christ, those things that do not have Christ at center, at the heart of life. Jesus' resurrection was not only for himself, but for all those who would come under his banner, his saving grace. Colossians 2:12, we read this. It says this, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through faith in the powerful working of God who raised him from the dead. We now can live a truly free life. One whose identity is found not by creating our own identities and living under our own banners, but a freedom based on what Jesus has done in giving us great victory over the powers that try to enslave us. Just as a bird who is made to fly by the currents of the wind rather than live under a sea, humanity as it was meant to be. Humanity as it was always designed and meant to be and to live out comes because of this weekend and comes because of this day. Notice what I like to do. We're going to be celebrating communion together. And communion, of course, very appropriate both to Good Friday and to Easter morning. Because, of course, as we said it on Good Friday, I mean, every time we come and we look at the communion elements, every time we talk about communion, it is Good Friday. That's what we're to remember. We're to remember what Jesus has done for us, the victory he has won for us at the cross. It's a great victory. It's an irony, but it is a victory. It is what we look to in ourselves for the freedom. It is how he becomes king over all. And so what we're going to do is we're going to celebrate communion together. But this is what I'd like to do. And I want to invite, basically, everyone to communion. But I always want to make sure that I remind you that communion, when we take communion, this is not just some nice religious event, just some nice religious thing that Christians do. You know, it's almost like the secret handshake, you know what I mean, or something like this. You know, we take communion. I'm not sure. That's not it. It's not just something we were trained to do or every Christian does, so that's what we do. It is truly a proclamation. It is a proclamation of faith itself. And there is a little story in the Bible in Luke chapter 24, somewhere around verse 28. This is after Jesus' resurrection. And there's two buddies, and they're walking together to Emmaus. And they're a bit disappointed that Jesus died, you see. And at the same time, they've got some business, and they've got some other things to do. And they're quite not sure what really to make of it all. They hear stories about Jesus. Some people say, hey, Jesus, you know, they went to the empty tomb, and what happened? You know, I don't know. I don't really know. They really weren't in it yet, you know, and they didn't quite get it, that Jesus had said he would die and he would raise, you see, and rise on the third day. And so they're on their way, I guess we're just going to have to keep doing business, you know how it is. Any one of us who have had a loss, right, whether it be close to us, what do? Well, you just keep going, right? That phrase has been how many funerals I've done and memorial. What do you do as a family? What do you do? Well, you just keep going. Why? Because, well, guess what? I got to go to work. I got to earn the money. I got to take care of the kids. Things don't slow up. It just keeps going. So these guys are kind of like that. You know, all right, Jesus died. And, well, where are you going? I'm going to Emmaus. I got some business to do. I'm making up the business part. It doesn't say that, but that's how I picture them, you know. Hey, I got some business too. Let's go, you know. Let's go to hang out together. Let's walk together, you know, kind of thing. And so it says, in verse 20 it says, as they drew near to the village to which they were going, Jesus, basically, who had all of a sudden showed up on their way as they were going. They didn't recognize Jesus. They didn't recognize it was him who all of a sudden came and started walking alongside them. They said, hey, what are you guys talking about? What are you guys doing? And next thing you know, they say, hey, well, we're going over here, you know, this kind of thing. And he starts telling they start telling Jesus the story of everything that's been going on, which is just great. And so I just love the story. But anyway, so it says, as they drew near to the village which they were going, he acted, or Jesus acted, as if he was going further. That's another thing I love about Jesus. He kind of did this little shuck and jive. He was like, well, okay, guys, I'm going to keep going. Really, it's exactly what he did. Kind of did a little shuck and jive. Shuck and jive, by the way, anyway, it's a 70s term. So anyway, just dated myself big time. And he acted as if he was going a little further. But they urged him strongly. They urged him strongly, saying to him, stay with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is now far spent. So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, now all of a sudden they're going to sit down and have a meal together. When he was at the table with them, Jesus is the one who took the bread, and he blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And what happened? Their eyes were opened in the breaking of the bread, in the giving of the cup. All of a sudden, they got it. They could see all of a sudden. The film that was over their eyes, all of a sudden, when it was removed from their eyes, they understood. And they recognized him. And then he vanished from their sight. And then he wasn't there. So when we take communion, there's a couple things that are going on, one of which is we recognize Jesus, what he has done for us. What that means for us. And it also, there's something we have to ask ourselves, has Jesus truly changed everything in my life? Or is it just life as usual, the way things are? As if you could, by the way, take a fork in your hand, stick it into an outlet, and have nothing happen. Because you see, for some, that is their religion. Really, they've come to Jesus and, okay, so now I go to church or I do this or I do that. But that's really not what happens. What happens is like having a fork in your hand, you stick it into an outlet, and everything changes. From the top of your head to the soles of your feet. Everything is changed. You are different. And for those two buds, and we are buds here, you see, we're walking out, trying to walk out life together in some way. When we come together, that's why communion is a community event. It's proper to take it, of course, even at home, with yourself, but really it has its most poignant and meaning when we do it together, because it's one loaf, one body, one baptism, you see, one faith, one Lord of all, and that's us. And so when we take the bread, we recognize that Jesus allowed his body to be broken on our behalf. That in looking at the bread and seeing the bread, we recognize that Jesus did something unbelievably grand for us. He took the separation that we had ourselves, that separation between us and God, and he brought salvation. He rescued us. He rescued us from living under someone else's banner, you see, to placing us under his banner. And so for us, this bread then, we see Jesus, and believe it or not, we see our part in it. That God's story and what God is doing in the world and our story and what we were doing in the world, all of a sudden, like two live wires, they cross. All of a sudden, faith happens. And we see ourselves in the story. We're no longer separate. That brokenness has been healed. That brokenness, you see, has now been mended. What God is doing in the world and what we're doing in the world, the meaning of life, why you exist, why there's a creation at all, and why you're in it. It's all answered in Jesus' body, broken for us. So I invite you to take it with me. And when we take the cup in our hands, of course, Jesus said this cup is a representation, if you will, of the new covenant. We talk about newness of life. It's a new covenant with us. One no longer based upon if you can measure up or not. Being a good little boy or a good little girl. Keep towing the line. You see, and then you'll be somehow accepted. Somehow you'll do whatever you got to do and you'll be pleasing to God someday, I'm sure. Wrong answer. Never happened. It's a new contract, a new one, based on his blood. He now is taking that upon himself and allowed us to walk into a newness of life, not one based on how good I am, how spiritual I am, how many times I've read the Bible, how many times a day I pray. That's not it. Those are things I may do because of Jesus in this relationship with Jesus, but that's not what gets me there. Only this gets me there. But this is not the warning necessarily, but this is the admonition. When you take the cup along with the bread, when you take the cup, you're doing something more than eating a piece of bread or drinking some juice from a cup. You are saying, by doing it, I believe this. And by taking this, I am proclaiming my faith in Jesus. What he has done, you see, is now in me. It is a part of me. It is my life. It is now my identity. I don't get my identity any longer from myself or from the world. I am now identified in him. And my taking of the cup, I am proclaiming that. That's why it's just not some nice little religious thing to do. It is a proclamation of faith. This I believe. And so maybe this is the first time you're taking it. Maybe somebody watching, it's the first time you're taking communion. Maybe this way. Maybe you've actually taken communion before, but maybe not with that understanding. I invite you to take it with that understanding here this morning. The cup of Jesus. Let's pray together. So, Father in heaven, we just thank you for all that you're doing here this day. Lord God, as we celebrate, Lord God, as we celebrate your resurrection this morning, Lord God, the celebration of new life, this celebration of the newness of life that we ourselves have, all because of you.